What did the king of rock and roll keep in his pockets? You see the pictures, the jumpsuits, the gold belts, the perfect hair. He seemed larger than life. A man who had everything. But what did he actually carry with him? Not the things for show. The personal items. The things he touched every day. The things that tell you who a person really is when the lights go out. We think we know Elvis Presley, the singer, the actor, the icon. But the small objects he kept close reveal a different man. A man searching for something. A man holding on to memories. A man struggling with demons. What if the key to understanding Elvis wasn't in his music, but in the strange collection of items he refused to leave behind? Could a book, a badge, or a simple photograph tell us more than any biography? Number 18 was a federal badge, his ultimate disguise. Elvis Presley carried a badge, not a stage prop, not a toy, a real official badge from the Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs. The bindi was a precursor to the Drug Enforcement Administration, the DEA. He got it directly from President Richard Nixon. The story is one of the strangest in American pop culture history. It happened on December 21st, 1970. Elvis was on a commercial flight to Washington, D.C. He was fed up. He saw the drug culture, the hippies, the anti-war protests. He felt his country was going down the wrong path, so he decided to do something about it. Right there on the plane, on American Airlines stationery, he wrote a 6-page letter to President Nixon. He introduced himself. He said he loved his country. He said he wanted to help. He wrote that the Beatles had been a bad influence. He said he had done an in-depth study of brainwashing and drug culture. He wanted to be made a federal agent at large. He hand-delivered the letter to a security guard at the White House gate. Somehow the letter made it to Nixon's aides. They saw an opportunity. Nixon was struggling to connect with young people. A meeting with the biggest star in the world could be a major public relations coup. They set up the meeting for that very day. Elvis arrived at the White House wearing a purple velvet suit with a huge gold belt buckle and a cape. He brought gifts for the president, including a Colt .45 pistol in a commemorative case. They met in the Oval Office. Photos from that day are now among the most requested images from the National Archives. You can see Elvis, earnest and passionate, showing Nixon his collection of police badges. He told Nixon he wanted to help fight the war on drugs. He wanted a federal badge to make his work official. Nixon, likely bewildered, but seeing the political upside, agreed. He ordered his staff to get Elvis a real bindi badge. Elvis was ecstatic. He saw the badge as a symbol of ultimate authority. It wasn't just a souvenir. To him, it was a license to carry his guns anywhere he wanted, a license to carry his prescription drugs without hassle. He believed it gave him real power. His friend and bodyguard, Jerry Schilling, was with him that day. In his book, Me and a Guy Named Elvis, Schilling describes the sheer joy Elvis felt. He finally felt like he was on the inside. He was no longer just an entertainer. He was a patriot, a protector, an agent of the government. But the irony is staggering. Elvis Presley, the man who would die 7 years later from an overdose of prescription drugs, was an honorary federal narcotics agent. He was deeply addicted to the very substances the B&D was formed to combat. He saw a difference between illegal street drugs, which he hated, and the prescription pills given to him by doctors. In his mind, one was dirty and criminal, the other was medicine. The badge helped him maintain that delusion. It was a shield. It made him feel righteous. It was a piece of metal that allowed him to believe he was part of the solution, not part of the problem. He carried it with him often. It was proof that he was more than a singer. He was a hero. At least, that's what he needed to believe. But what did President Nixon truly think of this meeting? Was it a sincere attempt to engage with a cultural figure, or a cynical photo op he found ridiculous? Did Elvis ever truly see the contradiction in carrying a narcotics badge while his own life was consumed by prescription drug abuse? And what would have happened if he had ever tried to use that badge in a real-life situation to stop a crime or make an arrest? Number 17, did a single photograph keep his mother alive? He lost his mother when he was 23. Gladys Presley died on August 14th, 1958. Well, Elvis was in the Army at the time, stationed at Fort Hood, Texas. He got emergency leave to come home to Memphis. He was devastated. People who were there said his grief was uncontrollable. He sobbed over her casket, telling her everything would be all right, that he loved her. Gladys had been the center of his universe. They were incredibly close, even sharing a private baby talk language. Her death left a void in his life that never healed. From that day forward, Elvis always carried a picture of her. It wasn't just one specific photograph that he kept for years. It was always a photograph of Gladys. Sometimes it was a small, worn photo in his wallet. Other times it was a framed picture he took with him on the road, placing it on his nightstand in whatever hotel room he was in. The image was a constant. It was a tangible piece of her he could hold on to. It was a reminder of a time before the fame, before the pressure, before the loneliness of being the king. Gladys represented home. She represented unconditional love and safety. In a world that was becoming increasingly surreal and isolating, that photograph was his anchor. Dr. Peter Whitmer, a psychologist who wrote the book The Inner Elvis, argued that Elvis's relationship with his mother was the defining psychological factor of his life. He was born a twin, but his brother, Jesse Garon, was stillborn. Whitmer suggests that Gladys poured all her love and attention into her surviving son, creating an unusually intense bond. Elvis became her whole world, and she became his. When she died, he didn't just lose a mother, he lost the primary mirror for his own identity. He spent the rest of his life trying to fill that emptiness. He surrounded himself with the Memphis Mafia, a group of loyal friends and employees. He married Priscilla. He had a daughter, Lisa Marie, but nothing could replace Gladys. The photograph was his way of keeping her present. It was a ritual. By having her image with him, he could talk to her, seek her approval, and feel her presence. It was a connection to his past and his most authentic self. The world knew him as Elvis the Pelvis, the rock and roll rebel. But the man who carried that picture was still just Gladys's boy from Tupelo, Mississippi. A reminder of where he came from, and perhaps a reminder of the person he was before the world made him into something else. The photo wasn't just a memento, it was a necessary tool for his emotional survival. But did carrying her picture truly bring him comfort, or did it trap him in a perpetual state of grief, preventing him from ever fully moving on? If Gladys had lived to see the Las Vegas years, would she have approved of the man he became? And how much of his self-destructive behavior in later years was a subconscious attempt to reunite with the one person who he felt truly understood him? Number 16 was a 3-letter mantra, his only religion. TCB. Taking care of business, it became Elvis's personal motto, his mantra, his brand. In 1969, as he prepared for his monumental return to live performing in Las Vegas, he wanted a symbol for his new philosophy. He was done with the cheesy movies, he was done with the old image, he was back to being a serious musician. He was in charge, he was taking care of business, he designed a logo, the letters TCB underneath a lightning bolt. The lightning bolt, he said, meant in a flash, taking care of business in a flash. It was about professionalism, speed, and loyalty. He had the logo made into custom gold necklaces. He gave them to the core members of his inner circle, the Memphis Mafia. Wearing a TCB necklace was a sign that you were one of his guys. You were trusted, you were family, it was more than jewelry, it was a badge of honor. He had a TCB ring, he had the logo painted on the tail of his private jet, the Lisa Marie. It was everywhere, and he almost always wore his own TCB necklace. It was a constant reminder to himself and everyone around him of his commitment. The TCB concept came from a place of renewed focus. The 1960s had been a frustrating decade for him musically. His manager, Colonel Tom Parker, had locked him into a series of formulaic, low-budget movies with forgettable soundtracks. Elvis felt like a joke. The '68 comeback special, a raw, powerful television performance, had reignited his passion. It proved he was still relevant, that he could still rock. The TCB mantra was the mission statement for this new chapter. It was about reclaiming his legacy. No more messing around. It was time to get serious. It was time to take care of business. Elvis also created a female version of the logo TLC for tender loving care. He gave TLC necklaces to the women in his life, including his wife Priscilla and his girlfriend Linda Thompson. It was his way of branding his entire world. Everyone had a role. The men were for business, the women were for care. This separation speaks volumes about his worldview and his relationships. He compartmentalized his life. TCB and TLC were the organizing principles. The necklaces themselves were not cheap. They were typically 14-karat gold, crafted by a Memphis jeweler named Lowell Hayes, and Elvis gave away hundreds of them. It was a gesture of generosity, but also a mark of ownership. If he gave you a TCB necklace, you belonged to him. You were part of his world, and you were expected to live by his rules. Loyalty was everything. Breaking that loyalty meant losing the necklace and being cast out of the circle. The TCB mantra was about efficiency and power, and it became the secular religion of the Graceland court, with Elvis as its high priest. But was the TCB mantra a genuine philosophy for professional excellence, or was it a way for a deeply insecure man to control everyone and everything around him? Did the lightning bolt symbolize getting things done in a flash, or did it represent his own volatile and unpredictable temper? And ultimately, in the final years of his life, when his health was failing and his performances were suffering, was he still taking care of business, or was the business taking care of him? Number 15, did a gun offer more security than his entourage? Elvis Presley loved guns. He didn't just own them, he collected them, carried them, and sometimes used them in startling ways. While he often had larger firearms nearby, his constant companion was often a small, concealable pistol. A common choice for him was a derringer. A derringer is a type of small, short-barreled handgun. It's easy to hide in a pocket, a boot, or an ankle holster. For Elvis, a gun was a necessary accessory like a watch or a ring. It was part of getting dressed. His fascination with firearms started early, but it intensified as his fame grew. The world saw him as a beloved icon, but he saw threats everywhere. He received death threats throughout his career. In the book, Elvis What Happened, written by 3 of his former bodyguards, they detail the constant security concerns. There were obsessive fans, extortion plots, and real dangers. In August 1969, during his first engagement at the International Hotel in Las Vegas, a serious death threat was made. The FBI got involved. For the next few shows, Elvis performed with a derringer tucked into his boot and his bodyguards on high alert in the audience, also armed. But the guns were for more than just protection from outside threats. They were a symbol of power and control in his own world. Elvis was the king of his castle, and the guns were a reminder of that. There are countless stories of him shooting out television sets when he saw something he didn't like, particularly a performance by a singer named Robert Goulet, for reasons that remain unclear. He would practice his quick draw skills in his hotel rooms. He wasn't just carrying a gun for self-defense, he was playing a role. He was the cowboy hero, the lawman, the tough guy. It was another layer of costume, another part of the Elvis persona he had constructed. His knowledge of firearms was extensive. He owned dozens of them, from ornate collector's pieces to practical weapons for personal carry. He was known to give guns as gifts to his friends. It was a sign of trust and brotherhood. But his casual relationship with firearms was often reckless. He once threw a firecracker in a room as a prank, and when one of his friends, Jerry Schilling, reacted angrily, Elvis pulled a gun on him. The moment passed, but it showed how quickly his mood could turn, and how the presence of a weapon could escalate even a minor conflict. The derringer in particular suited his needs perfectly. It was discreet. He could have it on him at all times, whether he was on stage, in his limousine, or meeting the President of the United States. It was a secret source of security in a life lived entirely in public. He was surrounded by bodyguards, but the gun was something he controlled personally. It was his last line of defense. In his mind, it was the one thing that could truly keep him safe when all else failed. It was a cold piece of steel that gave him a sense of calm in a chaotic world. But was the constant presence of a firearm a rational response to genuine threats, or a symptom of a deepening paranoia that fame had inflicted upon him? Did holding a gun make him feel powerful, or did it only amplify his feelings of fear and isolation? And if he felt so unsafe that he needed a hidden pistol on stage in front of thousands of adoring fans, had he already become a prisoner of his own success? Number 14 was a spiritual book, his escape from the material world. Amidst the diamond rings, the guns, and the police badges, Elvis carried something else. Or a book, not a bestseller or a thriller. It was a small, obscure spiritual text called The Impersonal Life. He discovered it in the mid-1960s, a time when he was feeling lost and spiritually empty. He was tired of the shallow Hollywood movies and the empty fame. He was searching for deeper meaning. His hairdresser and spiritual mentor, Larry Geller, introduced him to a world of esoteric thought, and this book became its centerpiece. The Impersonal Life was first published anonymously in 1914, attributed only to Joseph S. Benner. It's written in a strange style, as if God is speaking directly to the reader. The core message is that The individual I is an illusion. The real self is the divine consciousness, the I am that lives within everyone. The book teaches a form of meditation and self-inquiry designed to help the reader transcend the ego and realize their connection to this universal spirit. For Elvis, this was a revelation. The idea that Elvis Presley, the public persona, was not his true self was incredibly liberating. It offered an escape from the crushing weight of his own identity. He became obsessed with the book. He bought hundreds of copies and gave them away to friends, family, and even total strangers. He would read passages aloud to his entourage, trying to share his spiritual awakening. He carried a copy with him everywhere. It was his Bible. According to Geller's book, If I Can Dream Elvis's Own Story, Elvis would underline passages and make notes in the margins. He was an active student, not a passive reader. He truly believed he was on a path to enlightenment. This spiritual quest was a private side of Elvis that the public rarely saw. It stood in stark contrast to his image as a rock and roll hedonist. While he was living a life of excess in Las Vegas, surrounded by material wealth, he was privately reading a book that preached detachment from the ego and the material world. This was the central paradox of his later years. He was torn between two worlds. One was the world of Graceland, with its Cadillacs and jumpsuits. The other was the inner world of meditation and spiritual seeking, guided by the words in the Impersonal Life. His manager, Colonel Tom Parker, hated this new spiritual direction. He saw it as a distraction. He wanted Elvis to be a simple, all-American entertainer, not a mystic. He reportedly discouraged Elvis from talking about these subjects publicly and tried to limit Larry Geller's influence. But Elvis persisted. The book was too important to him. It gave him hope. It gave him a framework for understanding his own bizarre life. It told him that he was more than just a commodity, more than just a famous face. He was a spiritual being on a journey. But did the teachings of the Impersonal Life truly bring him peace? Or did they create a deeper conflict between his spiritual aspirations and his earthly appetites? Was his generosity in giving away the book a genuine attempt to enlighten others, or a way to validate his own beliefs by creating followers? And if he so deeply believed in transcending his ego, why did he remain so trapped by the demands and temptations of being Elvis Presley? Number 13. Could a single pillbox tell the story of his decline? It's the most tragic item on this list. Elvis Presley was rarely without his prescription medications. In the later years of his life, this meant carrying a small box, a bag, or a kit containing an assortment of powerful drugs. These weren't illegal street drugs. They were pills prescribed by doctors, barbiturates, amphetamines, tranquilizers, sleeping pills, painkillers. A pharmacy of chemicals to help him sleep, wake him up, kill his pain, and manage his mood. His reliance on prescription drugs began in the army in the late 1950s. Soldiers were given amphetamines to stay awake during long maneuvers. He found they gave him energy. Later, back in Hollywood, the grueling schedule of making 3 movies a year required him to stay thin and energetic, and amphetamines helped with that. But what goes up must come down. To counteract the uppers, he started taking downers, sleeping pills to help him rest. This became the vicious cycle that would dominate the rest of his life. An upper to start the day, a downer to end it. The man who provided many of these drugs was Dr. George Nichopoulos, known as Dr. Nick. He became Elvis's personal physician in 1967. After Elvis's death, Dr. Nick was investigated and eventually had his medical license permanently revoked for overprescribing medication not just to Elvis, but to many other patients. In the final year of Elvis's life alone, Dr. Nick had reportedly prescribed thousands of doses of various drugs for him. And Elvis believed he needed them. He had chronic pain from various health issues, including glaucoma, high blood pressure, and a damaged colon. He suffered from severe insomnia. He used the pills to function, to get on stage, to survive the tour. He would carry the pills with him in various containers. Sometimes his entourage would carry them for him in what was called a medical kit. These kits contained prearranged packets of pills for specific times of the day, or a packet to get him going for a show, a packet to help him wind down after, and a packet to put him to sleep for the night. This was not a secret habit. It was a highly organized daily routine. The people around him knew. They were participants enabling his addiction because they were on his payroll and because they too were caught up in the madness of his world. The little box of pills represents the darkest part of the Elvis story. It shows how a man who had everything could be brought down by something so small. It speaks to the isolation of fame. He was surrounded by people, but no one could or would stop him. The medical establishment failed him, prescribing dangerous quantities of drugs. His friends failed him, unwilling to confront the king, and ultimately, he failed himself, unable to break free from the chemical prison he had created. The pills that he thought were helping him perform were destroying his body and mind. The item he carried for health was the very thing that was killing him. But if so many people knew about his massive drug consumption, why was nothing done to stop it before it was too late? Was Dr. Nick a greedy enabler, or was he a weak-willed doctor genuinely trying to help a superstar who was in chronic pain and impossible to refuse? And is it possible that Elvis, a man obsessed with control, knew exactly what he was doing and simply chose the drugs over a longer life? Number 12. Why did a poet from Lebanon speak to a boy from Tupelo? Alongside the esoteric The Impersonal Life, Elvis often carried another book of spiritual wisdom, The Prophet by Khalil Gibran. This is a much more famous book, a collection of 26 poetic essays on life, love, death, and the human condition. It was first published in 1923 and became a counterculture staple in the 1960s. For a man who publicly disliked the hippie movement, it's fascinating that he embraced one of its favorite texts. Like The Impersonal Life, the Prophet was introduced to him by Larry Geller during his period of intense spiritual seeking. The book's gentle philosophical tone appealed to him. It offered profound ideas in a simple, accessible way. Gibran's words on love, for example, spoke of both ecstasy and pain. On work, he wrote about labor as love made visible. On children, he said, they come through you but not from you, and though they are with you, yet they belong not to you. These were ideas that resonated with Elvis's own life experiences. He was a man who had experienced incredible love and incredible heartbreak. He was a man whose work defined him, and he was a father who adored his daughter but lived a life that kept them apart. The Prophet gave him a new language to understand these universal human feelings. It was a source of comfort and guidance. Biographer Peter Guralnick, in his definitive 2-volume work Last Train to Memphis and Careless Love, paints a detailed picture of Elvis's intellectual curiosity. He was not the uneducated country boy he was often portrayed as. He was a voracious reader, constantly searching for answers to life's big question. Carrying the Prophet was another sign of this hidden intellectual side. It was a side that didn't fit with the rock and roll image. It showed a man who was contemplative and sensitive. He would reportedly read passages to his friends and to Priscilla. He found beauty and truth in Gibran's poetry. The book is not tied to any specific religion. Its spirituality is universal. This appealed to Elvis, who was raised in the Assembly of God Church, but had become a student of all faiths. He was looking for the common threads that connected them all. The contrast between the two main books he carried is also interesting. The Impersonal Life is a direct instructional text about dissolving the ego. The Prophet is a softer, more poetic exploration of how to live a meaningful life. Together, they represented the two sides of his spiritual quest, the disciplined search for enlightenment, and the gentle appreciation of life's journey. Having this book in his possession was like having a wise friend to turn to for advice. It was a reminder to look beyond the superficial and connect with something deeper even when he was in the middle of the Las Vegas circus. But how did he reconcile Gibran's gentle philosophy of love and freedom with his own often controlling and jealous behavior in his personal relationships? Did he see the teachings in the book as an ideal to strive for, or as a description of a life he knew he could never truly live? And if he had embraced the book's wisdom more fully, could it have saved him from the isolation and excess that eventually consumed him? Number 11 was Brut Cologne, his scent of choice or a scent of the past. Elvis had a distinct smell. It was part of his presence, While he used many different fragrances over the years, one that is consistently mentioned by those who knew him is Brut. The classic green bottled cologne was launched in 1964 by Faberge. It was marketed as a masculine, sophisticated scent. Its slogan was, "The essence of man." For Elvis, who was meticulous about his grooming, his scent was an important part of his armor. He often carried a small bottle with him. In the mid-1960s, Brut was everywhere. It was an incredibly popular mainstream fragrance. That Elvis, a man who cultivated a unique and rebellious image, would choose such a common scent is interesting. It suggests that, on some level, he wanted to align himself with a conventional idea of American masculinity. He was a rebel, but he was also a patriot who respected authority and tradition. Brut was a safe, classic, all-American choice. It wasn't some exotic, foreign perfume. It was the kind of cologne a respectable man would wear. His friends and girlfriends have often commented on his scent. It was part of the overall sensory experience of being near him. The look, the voice, the smell. It all combined to create the legendary aura. Linda Thompson, who was his girlfriend for several years in the 1970s, has mentioned his use of Brut. For him, grooming was a ritual. The hair, the clothes, the jewelry, the cologne. It was all part of getting ready to face the world. It was a way of preparing his public self. Splashing on Brut was one of the final steps in the transformation from Elvis, the man, to Elvis, the king. Carrying a bottle with him meant he could reapply it whenever he needed. He was a performer. He sweat under the hot stage lights. He was constantly surrounded by people. He wanted to smell good. It was a matter of professionalism and pride, but perhaps it was also a source of comfort. Scent is powerfully linked to memory. The smell of Brut might have reminded him of a specific time in his life, perhaps the mid-60s, a period before the intense pressures of the Las Vegas residencies began. The choice of Brut is also a reminder that, for all his wealth, Elvis sometimes had simple tastes. He could have afforded any fragrance in the world. He could have had a custom scent created just for him. But he often stuck with a drugstore classic. It connects to the part of him that was still the boy from Mississippi, the truck driver who got a lucky break. He might be living in a mansion, but he could still appreciate the simple, accessible things. The small bottle of Brut was a link to a more normal world, a world outside the gilded cage of his fame. But did he choose Brut because he genuinely loved the scent, or was it just a habit he fell into and never bothered to change? As fragrances went in and out of style, did his continued use of a classic 1960s scent make him seem timeless or dated? And is it possible that the familiar smell was a form of self-soothing, a constant in a life that was spinning increasingly out of control? Number 10, were reading glasses his biggest secret? Elvis Presley was famous for his eyes. They were intense, magnetic. He often wore sunglasses, which only added to his mystique. What the public didn't know was that for much of his adult life, he needed reading glasses. It was a simple, mundane fact, but it was one he kept very private. Being seen in reading glasses didn't fit the image. The king of rock and roll was a symbol of youth and vitality. Needing glasses felt like a sign of aging, of imperfection. So he wore them in private, and he always had a pair with him. He was a passionate reader. As we've seen, he delved into complex spiritual and religious texts. He read books on history, numerology, and philosophy. To do this, especially as he got older, he needed his glasses. They were a practical tool, a key that unlocked the world of books he so loved. He would carry them in his pocket or in a case. Members of his inner circle were used to seeing him with his glasses on, sitting in a quiet corner of a room, engrossed in a book. It was a side of him that was completely at odds with his wild stage persona. The secrecy around the glasses says a lot about the pressures of fame. He had to maintain an image of perfection. Any sign of weakness or normal human frailty had to be hidden. In the 1950s, rock and roll was about rebellion and youth. In the 1970s, his Las Vegas act was about being a superhero in a jumpsuit, a god of music. A god doesn't need reading glasses. This small act of concealment shows the enormous gap between his public image and his private reality. In her book, Elvis and Me, Priscilla Presley talks about his constant self-improvement efforts. He was insecure about his lack of formal education and was always trying to learn more, to better himself. The reading glasses were the tool for that secret education. They were a symbol of his intellectual curiosity, a side of him he felt he couldn't share with the world. The world wanted the hip-swiveling boy or the karate-chopping showman. They didn't want the quiet intellectual with glasses perched on his nose. He also suffered from glaucoma, a serious eye condition that can damage the optic nerve. He was diagnosed in the early 1970s. This condition caused him pain and sensitivity to light, which is one reason he wore his iconic sunglasses so often, even indoors. His need for reading glasses was separate from this, but it adds to the story of his private health struggles. The eyes that the world swooned over were a source of real physical problems for him. The reading glasses were a practical necessity, a secret he carried with him every day. But was his refusal to be photographed in reading glasses a result of his own vanity, or was it a savvy business decision to protect his brand and image? If he had been more open about such a normal human issue, would it have made him more relatable to his fans, or would it have shattered the illusion they wanted to believe in? And how much emotional energy did it cost him to constantly hide these small, everyday realities of his life? Number 9, how much cash? Did a king need to feel secure? Elvis Presley rarely used credit cards. He preferred cash, and he carried a lot of it. He almost always had a large roll of bills on him, often held together by a thick rubber band or a money clip. We're not talking about a few $100s, we're talking about thousands, sometimes tens of thousands. For a man who could have anything he wanted just by asking for it, carrying a huge wad of cash seems strange. But it was essential to his sense of self. The cash was a symbol of his success. He grew up in extreme poverty in Tupelo, Mississippi. His family lived in a tiny 2-room shotgun shack. They often struggled just to put food on the table. For a boy from that background, the physical presence of money was a powerful reassurance. It was tangible proof that he had made it, that he would never be poor again. Stocks, bonds, bank accounts, those were abstract. A thick roll of $100 bills was real. He could see it, touch it, feel its weight in his pocket. The cash was also for his famous impulsive generosity. Elvis loved giving things away. If he saw a friend admiring a piece of jewelry, he would buy it for them. He famously bought cars, houses, and gifts for friends, family, and even complete strangers. One well-known story tells of him buying a new Cadillac for a woman he saw staring at in a dealership window. To do these things, he needed immediate access to money. The roll of cash in his pocket was his tool for creating instant happiness for those around him. It was a way he showed love and demanded loyalty. Having cash also gave him a sense of freedom and control. He didn't want to wait for a store to approve a check or a credit card. He wanted to be able to walk in, put the money down, and walk out with what he wanted. It was part of the taking care of business in a flash philosophy. Money meant speed. It meant power. It cut through red tape. In his world, cash was king, and he was the king. His bodyguard, Sam Thompson, noted that Elvis felt carrying cash was a responsibility of being a man. A man should be able to pay his way, to treat his friends, to handle any situation that arose. It was an old-fashioned idea rooted in his Southern upbringing, in a life where so much was managed for him by others, from his career to his daily schedule. Controlling his own pocket money was a small but significant act of independence. It was his walking around money, and it made him feel self-sufficient. But was the massive roll of cash a tool for generosity, or was it a way to buy affection and ensure the loyalty of those in his inner circle? Did carrying so much money truly make him feel secure, or did it only serve as a constant, heavy reminder of the poverty he was so desperate to escape? And in a world where he was surrounded by people who depended on him financially, could anyone ever give him an honest opinion? Or was he always just the man with the money? Number 8, was a simple comb a weapon against chaos? Elvis Presley's hair was a cultural landmark. The jet black pompadour of the 50s, the softer look of the 60s, the long sideburns of the 70s. His hair was as much a part of his identity as his voice, and he was obsessed with it. It had to be perfect. So it's no surprise that he always carried a comb, sometimes more than one, a pocket comb, a rat tail comb for styling. It was an essential tool of his trade. His natural hair color was a sandy brown. He started dyeing it black early in his career, believing it looked better on camera and on stage. The dark color made his blue eyes stand out. Maintaining the look was a major operation. It involved a team of stylists, most notably his spiritual guide, Larry Geller, who was also a talented hairdresser. But even with a professional team, Elvis was hands-on. He knew his hair, he knew how he wanted it to look. The comb in his pocket was for constant touch-ups, to make sure every strand was in place. The comb was more than just a grooming tool. It was a symbol of his meticulous attention to detail and his need for control. In a life that was often chaotic and unpredictable, his hair was one thing he could manage. Combing his hair was a small, repetitive, calming ritual. It was a moment of focus in a whirlwind of activity. Watch old footage of him. In moments of downtime, or even sometimes on stage, you might see him reach for a comb. It was an unconscious, comforting gesture. This obsession with his hair also reveals his deep-seated insecurity about his looks. He was considered one of the most handsome men in the world, but he was highly critical of himself. He worried about his weight, he was self-conscious about his appearance. The perfect hair was part of the armor he wore to face the public. If his hair looked right, he felt more confident. The comb was his weapon to keep that armor intact. The comb also connects him to the youth culture he helped create. In the 1950s, the greaser look, with slicked back hair, was a symbol of rebellion. Every young guy had a comb in his back pocket. By continuing to carry a comb throughout his life, Elvis was staying connected to that original rock and roll identity. He was still the rebel, the guy who shook up the world. Even when he was playing to middle-aged audiences in Las Vegas, the comb in his pocket was a small link to the raw energy of his youth. It was a reminder of who he was and where he came from. But was the constant grooming a sign of professional discipline or a symptom of a deeper body dysmorphic disorder? Did the ritual of combing his hair bring him genuine calm, or was it a compulsive behavior driven by anxiety? And if his famous hair was a mask, who was the man underneath it, and did he ever feel comfortable enough to take it off? Number 7. Did a Vapo inhaler hide a more serious problem? Among the more mundane items Elvis carried was a Vicks Vapo inhaler. It's a small plastic tube containing medicated vapors, usually menthol and camphor. People use it for nasal congestion from a cold or allergies. For a singer, keeping his nasal passages clear is important for breathing and vocal tone. On the surface, carrying an inhaler seems like a practical, professional choice. And for Elvis, it was partly that. He was a professional. He had to perform night after night, often in dry, air-conditioned hotel showrooms. Any little bit of help to keep his voice in shape was welcome. The inhaler was a quick, easy way to feel like he was clearing his head and his sinuses before a show. It was part of his pre-performance ritual. A quick sniff from the inhaler, a sip of water, and he was ready to go on stage. However, the story of the inhaler may be more complicated. Elvis was a hypochondriac. He was obsessed with his health, constantly worried about illness, and always seeking remedies for real or imagined ailments. His medicine cabinet was filled with all sorts of potions and pills. The inhaler fit into this pattern. It was a medical device, and using it made him feel like he was actively taking care of his body. It was another tool in his constant battle against physical decay. There is also a darker possibility. Some over-the-counter inhalers in that era, specifically the Benzedrine inhaler, contained amphetamine. Benzedrine inhalers were taken off the market in the late 1950s, but the idea of using an inhaler for a stimulant effect was well known. While the Vicks Vapo inhaler he used did not contain amphetamine, his use of it could be seen as a psychological habit linked to his dependence on other, more powerful stimulants. The act of using an inhaler might have provided a placebo effect, a small, legal hit that psychologically echoed the effects of the diet pills and other amphetamines he was taking. Regardless of the reason, the small plastic inhaler was a constant presence. It was in his travel kits, his dressing room, and often his pocket. It represents the professional singer trying to protect his instrument. It represents the hypochondriac searching for any remedy to feel better, and it hints at the larger, more destructive patterns of substance use that defined his later life. It was a seemingly innocent object, but it was part of a much more complex and tragic picture of his health. But was the inhaler a genuine vocal aid, or was it more of a psychological crutch, a nervous habit like tapping a foot or cracking one's knuckles? Did he use it because it actually worked, or simply because a doctor once recommended it and he never stopped? And how many other innocent remedies was he using to mask the symptoms of the serious prescription drug abuse that was destroying his system from the inside out? Number 6 was a silver cross his ticket to heaven. Elvis Presley was a man of faith. He was raised in the Pentecostal church, and the gospel music he sang as a boy was his first and deepest musical love. He won his only 3 Grammy Awards for his gospel recordings. Throughout his life, he wrestled with questions of sin, redemption, and God. Despite his wild lifestyle, he never lost his belief in a higher power. A symbol of this belief that he often carried was a simple silver cross. He wore different crosses on necklaces throughout his life, but he also kept them as personal talismans. The cross was a direct connection to his Christian upbringing. It was a symbol of comfort and protection. In a world that was often dark and confusing, the cross was a reminder of the simple faith of his childhood. It was a piece of home he could take with him anywhere. His spirituality, however, was not simple. As he got older, he became a spiritual seeker, exploring different religions and belief systems. He read the Bible alongside the Bhagavad Gita and the Book of Mormon. He was fascinated by numerology, theosophy, and the occult. He was trying to find a universal truth, but he always came back to Jesus. He identified with Jesus' story. He saw parallels between his own life, a poor boy who became a king to millions, and the life of Christ. Larry Geller, his spiritual mentor, said that Elvis was divinely intoxicated. He was on a mission from God, he believed, to bring joy to the world through his music. The cross was a physical representation of that mission. It reminded him of his purpose. But he also struggled with guilt. He knew his lifestyle, the drugs, the women, the excess was at odds with the teachings of his faith. He would reportedly have moments of deep remorse, praying for forgiveness. The cross might have been a way to feel closer to that forgiveness. It was a symbol of grace, a hope that despite his sins, he could still be saved. In the 1970s, he also famously wore a necklace with a cross, a Star of David, and the Hebrew letter Chai, which means life. He told people he didn't want to be left out of heaven on a technicality. This was a classic Elvis line, funny, a little flippant, but with a core of genuine anxiety underneath. He was covering all his bases. The simple silver cross, however, was the most fundamental of these symbols. It was the foundation of his faith, the starting point of his spiritual journey. It was a direct line to the gospel hymns he loved and the God he hoped was watching over him. But did he carry the cross as a genuine expression of a deep and abiding faith, or was it more of a superstitious good luck charm, like a rabbit's foot? How did he reconcile the Christian symbol of sacrifice and humility with his own life of staggering indulgence and ego? And in his final moments, did he find the peace and redemption that the cross represented, or was he left with only his questions and his guilt? Number 5. Could a library card prove he was more than just a singer? This might be the most unexpected item. Elvis Presley, the man who could buy any book he wanted, carried his card for the Memphis Public Library. It's a small, telling detail. It speaks to a part of him that is often overlooked, his genuine love of learning and his connection to his hometown. The library card was a symbol of his roots. Before he was Elvis the superstar, he was Elvis from Memphis. The library was a normal place, a place where anyone could go. Carrying the card was a way of holding on to that normality. It was a reminder that he was still a citizen of Memphis, a regular guy. In a life that had become completely abnormal, small connections to an ordinary existence were incredibly important. He was a member of the library just like thousands of other people in the city. It also speaks to his intellectual curiosity. We've discussed the spiritual books he read, but his interests were much broader. He read about history, war, religion, and science. The library represented a world of knowledge. While he had the money to buy any book, the library card was a symbol of access to all of it. It was a key to a universe of ideas. As a young man without a college education, he was a dedicated autodidact. He taught himself. The library was his university. This directly contradicts the public image of him as a simple country boy. That was an image that was partly true and partly cultivated by his manager, Colonel Tom Parker. The Colonel wanted Elvis to be relatable, an all-American hero. He didn't want him to seem like a complex intellectual. But the library card in his pocket tells a different story. It tells of a man who was hungry for knowledge, who was always searching, always reading, always trying to understand the world. Think about the sheer humility of it. Elvis Presley, a global icon, keeping a humble library card. He could have had any book in the world delivered to him at Graceland with a single phone call. But he kept the card. Perhaps it reminded him of a time when going to the library was a treat, a special outing. A time before the fame, when a world of adventure could be found for free on a shelf. It was a connection to a simpler, quieter version of himself. The library card wasn't for Elvis the King. It was for Elvis the reader. But did he ever actually use the card in his later years? Or was it purely a nostalgic keepsake? Was carrying it a genuine sign of humility, or was it another piece of his carefully constructed persona being a man of the people? And what books would he have checked out if he could have walked into the Memphis Public Library anonymously on a Tuesday afternoon? Number 4, why did he carry a copy of a numerology book? Elvis was always looking for patterns. He was searching for a hidden order in the chaos of his life. This search led him to the ancient practice of numerology, the belief that numbers have a mystical significance and can reveal truths about a person's character and destiny. One of the books he frequently carried was Chiro's Book of Numbers. Chiro was the pseudonym of William John Warner, an Irish astrologer and occultist who was famous in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. His books on palmistry, astrology, and numerology were incredibly popular. Chiro's Book of Numbers provided a system for understanding the world through numbers. It taught how to calculate the numbers associated with your name and birth date and how to interpret their meaning. For Elvis, this was a powerful tool. It offered a secret code to understanding himself and the people around him. He was fascinated by the number 8. He was born on January 8th. He believed the number held special significance for him. According to Chero's system, the number 8 is associated with the planet Saturn. It's a number of extremes, great success or great failure. It represents a life of fate and destiny, often with a spiritual dimension. This resonated deeply with Elvis. He felt that his life was fated. He didn't feel he was in complete control. He was living out a destiny that had been written for him. Numerology gave him a framework for this belief. He would reportedly do numerology charts for his friends and employees. He would analyze their names and birth dates to see if they were compatible with his own. It was a way of trying to control his environment, to make sure he was surrounded by the right people. It was part of the strange, mystical world he built around himself at Graceland. The book was his guide, his instruction manual for this secret science. Carrying the book was a sign of how deeply he had immersed himself in this way of thinking. It wasn't a passing fancy, it was a serious study. It was another piece of the puzzle in his lifelong spiritual quest. He was looking for answers that conventional religion couldn't provide. He wanted a system. He wanted rules. Numerology offered a universe that was ordered and meaningful, where everything happened for a reason that could be understood if you just knew how to do the calculations. In a life that often felt random and overwhelming, the logic of numbers was a great comfort. But did he use numerology as a tool for self-reflection or as a justification for his own prejudices and decisions about the people in his life? Was his belief in a fated destiny a source of spiritual comfort, or did it become a convenient excuse for his own self-destructive choices? And ultimately, did the numbers offer him real insight, or just a more complex form of superstition? Number 3, did his driver's license lie about who he was? Every adult carries a driver's license. Elvis Presley was no exception. It was a necessary piece of identification. But his license was more than just a permit to drive. It was a small document that captured the strange reality of his life. He loved to drive. Cars were one of his great passions. Driving was an act of freedom for him, a way to feel normal. But the information on the card itself told a more complicated story. On some of his licenses, the details like height and weight were approximations. As his weight fluctuated, particularly in his later years, the number on the license might not have reflected reality. It was a small, state-sanctioned fiction. More telling was the name Elvis A. Presley. That simple name held the weight of the world. A police officer pulling him over wouldn't be dealing with a regular citizen. They would be dealing with a legend. The license was both an ordinary object and an extraordinary passport. He had multiple licenses issued over the years from different states, including Tennessee and California. Each one is a snapshot in time. The photo on the license was one of the few official images of him where he wasn't posing for an album cover or a movie poster. It was a bureaucratic photo, often unflattering, just like anyone else's, and yet it was still unmistakably him. The license was a point where the myth and the man met in a laminated rectangle. Carrying his license was also connected to his love of law enforcement. He collected police badges, and he saw himself as an ally of the police. Having his license in order was part of being a good, law-abiding citizen. It was a sign of respect for the system he so admired. He could break the rules in his personal life, but he followed the rules of the road. The license in his wallet was a fundamental piece of his identity, but it was an identity that was almost impossible to live with. It gave his name, his address at Graceland, a place that had become both a sanctuary and a prison. It listed a birth date that marked the beginning of an incredible journey. It was a document that said, "I am a real person, an official resident of this state," while the reality was that he was a citizen of a world all his own, a world with different rules. The license was an attempt to ground him in the real world, but it also highlighted how far from the real world he had drifted. But did he see his driver's license as a connection to a normal life, or as a tool that gave him special privileges on the road? When he looked at the photo on the license, did he recognize the man he saw, or did he feel a sense of detachment from that official image? And what was the one detail on his license that he was most proud of and the one he was most ashamed of? Number 2 was a woman's wedding ring, his most cherished trophy. Elvis was famous for giving jewelry away, but he also kept pieces that were given to him. He often carried items from fans, but one of the most peculiar things he was known to carry was a woman's wedding ring. The story behind it is not perfectly clear, which adds to the mystery. Some accounts say it was a ring that a fan threw on stage during a concert. She had supposedly taken it off her own finger. He was so moved by the gesture that he picked it up and kept it. Whether that specific story is true, the act of carrying such an object is deeply symbolic. A wedding ring is a symbol of commitment, love, and union. For a fan to give him hers was the ultimate act of devotion. Well, it was a statement that her loyalty to him was greater than her loyalty to her own marriage. For Elvis, who thrived on the adoration of his fans, this was an incredibly powerful trophy. It was physical proof of his effect on people. Carrying the ring was a reminder of that power. It was a secret he held in his pocket. It represented the thousands of women who screamed his name, who, bought his records, who dreamed of being with him. In a way, he was married to his audience, and this ring was the symbol of that strange public marriage. His actual marriage to Priscilla had ended in divorce in 1973. Perhaps carrying a fan's wedding ring was a substitute, a symbol of a love that he felt was more pure and unconditional than any personal relationship could be. The ring also speaks to the loneliness of his position. He was loved by millions, but he struggled to find lasting, stable love in his private life. The fan on the other side of the stage lights was an idea, not a real person with flaws and demands. The love she offered was perfect, uncomplicated adoration. The ring was a symbol of that perfect love. It was a love that asked for nothing in return except for him to be Elvis. It was safe. It couldn't betray him or leave him. This small metal circle was a token of the surreal world he inhabited. A world where a stranger would give him the most intimate symbol of her life. A world where he, in turn, would treasure it as a meaningful artifact. It was a transaction that could only happen between a star of his magnitude and a devoted fan. The ring was a piece of his mythology, a tangible relic from the religion of his own fame. But did he see the ring as a symbol of the love he received, or as a symbol of the lives he had disrupted with his fame? Did he ever think about the woman who threw it, and what happened to her marriage afterward? And was carrying it a way of feeling connected to his fans, or was it a way of objectifying them, reducing their complex emotions to a single, shiny trink-sobbing? Number 1. What did the TLC stand for when the love was gone? We know about TCB taking care of business. It was for the men in his life. The professional side. For the women, he created TLC, tender loving care. He had gold necklaces made with this logo too, with the same lightning bolt as the TCB design. He gave them to his wife Priscilla, his girlfriend Linda Thompson, and other women he was close to. On the surface, it was a sweet gesture. It was his way of honoring the importance of love and care in his life. He almost always wore his TCB necklace, and he often carried a spare TLC necklace with him. He carried it as a gift to be given. Elvis was a man who planned his spontaneity. He liked to be ready for any occasion. Having a TLC necklace on hand meant he was always prepared to bestow this special honor on a woman who caught his eye or earned his affection. It was part of his courtship ritual. Giving a woman a TLC necklace was a sign that she was now part of his inner world. She had been officially accepted. But the TCB-TLC dichotomy reveals a lot about his worldview. Men were for business. Women were for tender, loving care. He separated the worlds. He expected the men around him to be tough, loyal, and efficient. He expected the women to be soft, nurturing, and beautiful. The necklaces were like labels, assigning roles to everyone in his court. He was the king, and everyone else had a part to play. The lightning bolt is the most interesting part of the design. On the TCB necklace, it meant in a flash for business, done quickly. What did it mean on the TLC necklace? Tender, loving care. His romantic life was a series of passionate, but often short-lived affairs. The lightning bolt was a perfect symbol for his approach to love, a sudden, brilliant flash, but not always a long, steady burn. Carrying that spare TLC necklace was a symbol of his constant search for love and connection. He was a man who needed to be in a relationship. He hated being alone. The empty space in his pocket where the necklace sat was waiting to be filled by the next woman who could provide the tenderness he craved. It was a sign of his hopefulness, but also his restlessness. He was always looking for the next person who could make him feel whole, even for a little while. It was a gold-plated question, waiting for an answer. But was the TLC necklace a genuine symbol of affection, or a branding iron used to mark the women in his life as his property? Did the women who received it feel cherished, or did they feel like they were being given a uniform for a role they were now expected to play? And when his relationships ended and the tender, loving care was gone, what did that lightning bolt truly come to represent?